Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings. It's good to be here.
Yes. You floating over Michigan, me floating over Heretic Brewing Company, or
That's right.
wherever we each are.
Where we're most appreciated, right?
Oh, well, you might be. Me, who knows? I appreciate having beer readily accessible.
That is a nice perk, yes.
I saw somebody post on Facebook. There's like a pro brewers Facebook group.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you remember.
Yeah, I just recently joined, yeah.
Right. And somebody posted, it's like, what is the thing, you like most about your brewery? It's like, there's beer there. I mean, is that the answer you can get from all 3,000 people? It's like, well, yeah, ready access to beer.
And the beer I like, yes.
Yes, beer I think is good. There we are. It's as simple as that. What's the second thing? I have no idea. I'm still just pleased with the first. Speaking of people I'm pleased with, our good friend John Blickman.
You
know why?
John, yes.
Because he has been paying for the show, so our listeners don't have to, for getting close to 2 decades now. Yeah. I don't know how many decades we've been doing this, but my understanding of a decade is,
an eternity.
Around 10 years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And we appreciate John making it possible for us to continually talk beer with you guys. It's a couple hours a week that we get to step away from the family life and say, I really need to talk about beer. And John makes that possible.
There you go. No, he's a great friend and a great asset to the brewing community and just everybody around him. And he's used his superior intelligence to design and produce and make accessible to the brewing community across the world some great brewing equipment. So check it out. BlickmanEngineering.com. Check out the website. Lots of great stuff there. And you can actually send a kind thanks to Mr. John Blickman. Feedback at BlickmanEngineering.com. Tell him how much you appreciate that he's paid for the show so you don't have to. And trust me, he gets every one of those emails. And he enjoys seeing that people, that the show actually reaches people and that you enjoy what we're doing. So that's why he's paying for this show, for no other reason than that. So make sure to send him a good email. I'd appreciate it. I know John would appreciate it, and John would appreciate it.
That's right.
My two closest Johns. There you go. Today, we're going to be doing a Q&A show. We have been lax. We've been talking about some great subjects, but we have not kept up with our Q&A pool. If you have questions to ask us here on Brew Strong, you can send them to brewstrong at thebrewingnetwork.com, and just preface it with a question for the show. And you won't get our immediate response, but eventually we'll get to it. I mean, it may be 2 decades later, but we'll get to every single one of those questions. I promise you.
That's right.
And one of the first questions that came up is, let's see here. Rich, he was asking, I hope you guys are still producing the podcast, that everything is going well for Jamil.
Indeed.
Yes. What I love about this is, yes, we're still producing the podcast. We missed a few months there because of the pandemic and the fires and everything else that's going on.
Right.
It kind of messed us up, and family stuff. John has lost a dear family member. It's just been a rough ass last 2 years. I'll tell you that.
It really has. Yeah. Did you have to evacuate from Vacaville with the fires?
We came within like 1 block of being evacuated.
Yeah, so I thought looking at the news. Yeah.
Yeah, my one of my daughters lives up in Rockland, and the other was living at the house with us, and she evacuated. She's like, I'm not waiting around. She does 911 dispatch, and so she's like,
Right.
look, Dad, time to leave. I'm like, one, I'm not leaving without Liz. I said, I'm not leaving without Mom. I said, you go. I said, I'm waiting for Mom. I'm not going anywhere without her. And she was here at the brewery.
Right.
And I'm like, either I'll go to the brewery and wait with her there, or she'll come back to the house. Our house, it's a newer house, and we moved in, trying to get closer to the brewery. And, it's all stucco, tile roof, not a lot of plantings around it. There's a giant cul-de-sac. I'm like, and it's actually got fire sprinklers on the inside, all these new construction homes in California.
Wow.
And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to burn. I think I'm safe. And, at worst, I go out and sit in the car in the cul-de-sac, far enough from everything that I wouldn't burn there either.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt very safe. And the brewery's safe. It's all, this damn place will never burn down, unfortunately. It's going to take it's going to take an errant missile strike from an accidental missile strike from the air base to take this place out. It's all concrete. Right. Yeah, it's not going to burn. So we're safe. It gets close. This is 2 years in a row where it got really close, but yeah, we're surviving. So everything going well for John. Well, what cracked me up about this was didn't ask about you, John. It's just wants to make sure everything's going well for me. And,
yeah.
Which is I understand, it's because
more people are interested in you.
Well, everybody loves me. You, no, not so much. But me, yeah.
I kind of fly under the radar. Yeah.
I am beloved, I think. I am I am just important. I think maybe they realize that without me, they'd have to listen to like you and Justin. And
there you go. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There's the problem, right?
Listenership would fall off by 2 or 3 people. That would 70% there.
That'd be 70-80%. Yeah. I mean, the 5 people that count on this, they'd be pretty disappointed, or 2 or 3 of them would.
Yeah.
Anyways, so thank you, Rich, for thinking of us and and asking. It just cracked me up that he was hoping it went well for me, not you so much, but for me.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's great. I'm sure he didn't intend it that way. Maybe he was asking because I've had recent medical problems.
Yes.
Or perhaps that's what he meant. And he cares about you greatly, John, just like I do. One of the cool things about doing these shows live on Facebook is that it makes it so much easier for us to get listener feedback and for listeners to ask questions. The absolutely gorgeous Bevo is kindly monitoring the Facebook comments. So don't say anything weird or pornographic, you guys. But if the point is, if you want to ask a question live, she's there to get your questions, filter them, so we don't have to look at your inane chatter, and ask them of us. And Dolph has asked, I'm not sure what the topic is yet today, because we're rambling. It is Q&A. But my problem recently has been getting malt aroma. I make beers out of brewing classic styles and a lot, and the malt balance ones always seem to be lacking in malt aroma. Could it be how finely I mill my grain? All other vital statistics seem to be in order, and the beer tastes very good, and I don't seem to be infected at all. I even buy great malt like Vireman from Northern Brewer. But when I compare mine to commercial examples, malty aroma and flavor are much more mild with mine. German beers are a very notable example.
Well, that's interesting.
I
Because
mean,
I always consider your recipes pretty malty.
right.
So
My first thought would be a couple of things. One is three things. One is, you're buying great malt like environment, but sometimes people will buy just like certain specialty malts, which are very important, but they'll ignore the base malt. They'll do like,
yeah,
the cheapest base two row they can get and then hope to dress it up with specialty malts. But one of the things about um, malt aromatics is I think a lot of it's carried by the quality of the base malt, and that the malt is fresh. So if you
yeah,
get your malt from a homebrew shop and it's nice and fresh, don't store it in the garage at 110 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 months and then expect it to taste as good. It will deteriorate over time. Or conversely, storing it cold and wet and damp, it'll deteriorate over time. So be
right.
careful about that. Make sure you're using a very high quality base malt. I know, even between certain, American two row base malts, there's a huge aromatic difference between them, and extract efficiency as well. So that was one. The second thing was, as always, fermentation. If you are not getting a really great fermentation that fully attenuates the beer to the maximum potential it should be, and this is, I'm not talking about adding simple sugar and trying to drive the number lower. What I'm talking about is your yeast fully fermenting as normal the maltose and everything else that is present, leaving behind the great aromatics that'll come out. If you have too much residual sugar in the form of unfermented wort, it will be wordy and it's suppressive, just like a lot of times adding crystal malt will suppress hops and the other characteristics. Leaving behind some unfermented wort will also suppress some of that malt characteristic. So that's number two. And number three is, I think, one of your favorites, John, is water. I think,
Oh
certain
yeah,
water
yeah.
profiles will kind of enhance the malty character, maybe not aromatically, but flavor wise, certainly
Depth. Yeah.
yeah. And that depth, when you're having a drink, will, you'll get that difference of flavor. So those are the three things I could come up with. How about you?
Well, he mentioned that he didn't think contamination was a factor,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he didn't identify his yeast or his water profiles, as you mentioned. I think one thing to always be aware of is diastaticus, and more diastatic yeast strains, which, because they tend to break down some dextrins,
You know,
they can ferment out some of the malt flavor. Now, this is generally more the case when you're dealing with a wild yeast infection, and you'll open a beer and all the malt aroma is gone because it's reduced it to carbonated water. But I think that could be an aspect, potentially.
well, I, I I'm not sure about that. Okay, so, but if so, diastaticus is fermenting, these long chain sugars, these dextrins that
Yeah,
are normally unfermentable, but those are not the flavor compounds that produce maltiness.
like the
They're pretty
Maillard
much,
reactions.
yeah, they're aromatically
Hmm.
neutral and flavor, pretty much flavor neutral, right? So I'm not sure that would be the case.
Well, I think it's all collaborative when it comes to these fermentation compounds that
Yeah.
create what we call maltiness. And I know
Yeah.
for a fact that I've had both my own beers and beers in competition where there is no malt aroma at all. And the beer body is very thin, it's very carbonated, it's had some wild yeast infection. that has removed a lot of that. Now, maltiness can also disappear due to oxidation,
Right.
depending on the kind. I mean, there's so many different kinds of oxidation, but but I think those are possibilities as well.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure I'm convinced on that, but I certainly believe it could affect certainly the overall flavor. I'm not convinced on the aroma, but I'm convinced on absolutely on the flavor. All right, let's do this. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we got Brian listening live, and we're gonna ask or we're gonna answer a question he has for us about rye IPA. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back. It's a joy to be back here with you, John.
Thank you.
See, even when we're only taking a 5-second break, it's amazing what happens during the breaks. Brian, who's listening live on Facebook, you can listen live to these shows that we're doing at least here during the. I think we're going to continue doing it this way for pretty much forever. So you can listen live. Brian, he's listening live on Facebook, and he was saying, I'm planning to brew a rye IPA this weekend, and I have 2 questions. Is it 10% of rye malt in the grist too little, too much, or just right? And will using flaked rye instead of rye malt present any benefits? Well, I would say 10% of rye malt is fine in the grist. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. I have had 100% rye malt beer, which turns out like snot coming out of a bottle. And I've had 50% and I've had 10%. I'd say generally 10% is as low as you'd really want to go. Anything less than that, it's pretty much had almost no effect whatsoever. Going in the 10 to 20%, the issue with it is, 1, it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. 2, it's got some viscosity to it, and it ends up making it hard to sparge, hard to mash. So that's kind of it. Flaked rye instead of rye malt. The flaked rye is not malted, clearly, because
bingo.
It's and that's one of the things. I don't think it provides any benefits to rye malt. I mean, unless you're just trying to get more of the gooiness,
rye character.
Well, I think with malting, you also break down some of the beta glucanase or the beta glucan.
Right.
Beta glucanase will break down
the beta glucans.
Yes, but yes. So these, so you'll get a little bit less of the glucan in the malted. But you should get a little bit better flavor from the malted than you should from, and you'll get a little bit more fermentability, or sugar extract, I should say. Fermentability is controlled elsewhere. So does that answer the question, Brian?
Kind of. I think I agree with you, Jamil, that 10% is kind of low end for if you're trying to make a rye IPA. I would kick that up to maybe 20-25% if it's rye malt that's being used. But as you say, if it's going to be the flaked rye, you lose the benefit of the malting process in reducing the beta glucan content. And so I'm just off the top of my head, I'm going to say 20-25% of rye malt is going to contribute out the same amount of body that 10%, 5 to 10% of the flaked rye would, because of that trade-off in malting versus
glucan from malted from. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a 50%. I
Yeah,
don't know. I'm sure there's numbers somewhere.
Yeah.
Ideally, you could look at the spec sheet on your flaked and the spec sheet on your malted, and it'll tell you what the reduction in glucan is. And that's probably your biggest thing there.
Yeah.
If it were me, I'd tend to lean towards malted rye. Just
Yeah. Less hassle in the lautering, and still good flavor, good fermentability.
there you go. Jimmy says, I'm planning on to do a fall beer along the lines of a pumpkin beer, but instead of pumpkin spice, I plan to use garam masala. Indian spice,
Yeah. Kind of curry, Middle Eastern kind of.
cumin, cinnamon, coriander, ginger, cloves, cardamom, and maybe sweet potato or butternut instead of pumpkin. Thoughts on this and a good base style? Ooh, I don't know. I think that I think that sounds wonderful. I am curious now. I have not come up with this idea, but now I'm thinking, since it's posted on the internet and it's free for anybody to try, I'm curious to try this. I'd like to try this here. I think that's a great idea. Um, I think it would have a limited market, but I'm still willing to try it for our tap room. Sweet potato or butternut instead of pumpkin. Thoughts on this? And a good base style. Good base style is always on anything fall, autumn, spiced beers, holiday spice, an amber ale. Not a hoppy amber ale, but amber ale as it was back in like the year 2000, which seems like such a long time ago. So just kind of a moderate alcohol ABV, maybe in the 5-6%. You can go a little bit more, I'm sure.
Yeah.
A bit of crystal malt, maybe layer a couple of kinds of crystal malt there, and relatively clean ale yeast, or maybe even an English ale yeast with a little bit of fruitiness, and really low hopping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mild, a little bit sweet. I think sweetness really helps with these fall beer styles. I think it helps carry the spices without them seeming harsh. You
Right.
can actually go to a higher spice level when you have some sweetness backing it. One of the things about a pumpkin pie is it's sweet, right? And so when you have a pumpkin pie that isn't sweet and you have all those spices, it's pretty harsh. So that's one of the reasons for going with the amber ale. Do you choose something different? Maybe a porter or something?
No, I agree with you, Jamil. The all those points: amber ale, low hopping, low bitterness. Let the spices come through. Couple things: the best pumpkin beer or fall ale like that, field ale I ever had was at the Northern California Homebrew Fest a few years ago when you and I and Tasty were there. It was 11% from a club up there, contained no pumpkin, just spices and all that alcohol sweetness, and it really carried the spices well. Very well balanced, no harsh aftertaste. It was I had 2 or 3 glasses of that beer. Um, the nothing wrong with wanting to ferment pumpkin or butternut squash or sweet potato.
Mhm.
Just bear in mind, these are not pure starches that we're used to working with, as in the cereal grains. There's a lot of protein, there's a lot of other stuff, uh, cellulose mixed in with squash and potatoes and so on. So you're going to get a gummier mash.
Mhm.
So mash some for the fun of it, but don't try to make it 50%, 100%, because it's just going to turn into porridge.
Right. I think one of the things that helps is to bake those in the oven first.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You develop some of those caramelized sugars that a lot of people associate with those things. I would try that, and go for it. See what happens. Like I said, people did 100% rye malt beers. It's
yeah,
possible. It tends to be work and may turn out weird, but give it a shot.
yeah. We're doing this for fun, but don't kill yourself.
All right, I gotta turn to some of the email here. Let's see here. There's one in particular. Some of these people listening live. Let's see here. Now I'll go with this one here. All right. And as a reminder, you can send us questions at brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. John writes, hi, this is Johnny from Baltimore. I'm having what I call success brewing extract kits in my kitchen. How many batches and what styles do you suggest I try before moving to all grain? And how much harder and expensive is the new equipment I will need? And the biggest question is, how much extra space does all grain brewing take up as opposed to my one pot and a bucket? Any insight would be helpful. He says, I'm a former chef turned mailman who got a free kit on my route. And I have a homebrew shop on my route in my neighborhood.
Nice.
I've done 4 5-gallon kits and 2 1-gallon kits, and 1 recipe for my homebrew shop, an ESB that if you issues with. For better, let's see. Temps are high right now. He's like he's listened to 100 shows in the last few weeks, and he's learned a lot.
Well, that's good.
I think first off, thanks for working the postal service. I believe, with recent events, we all realize how we can't survive without having a U.S. Postal Service. So
that's right.
Well, thank you for your service and your dedication to doing it. I know a lot of these folks are, concerned about being exposed to the COVID and all that stuff. Our local postal system here, they bought like 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 small containers of sanitizer from us. So, and they were very appreciative that we were able to do that for them. So, tough times for people who have to go out and interact with the public with no choice on who that is. All right. So what's your suggestion here, John?
Well, one main question he asked was how many extract batches should he do? How many different styles should he do before he tackles all grain? And I think the answer to that is simply, we encourage extract brewing because it gets you interested in the hobby and it allows you to focus on fermentation more so than starting out with a full mash.
Yeah, you can make great beer with extract.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily you can make award-winning beer that will beat extract or all grain brewers beers just by focusing on the important stuff of brewing.
Yep. So a good fermentation is key. And that's one nice perk about starting with extract is you can help you dial that in. And then you can move on to doing the mash and lauter. And, you've got your fermentation nailed down. You can focus on worrying about dialing in your mash and lauter. So I think, half a dozen extract batches under his belt, I think he's ready.
Right. Well, I'd agree, so how many batches and what styles? I think it could be any one style. It could be multiple styles. What it needs to be is you need to be very comfortable that your fermentation is really strong and you're doing well there. Yeah. And your sanitation is really well done. If you've got those two things down, sanitizing and fermenting cleanly and properly, then the efforts of moving to all grain won't necessarily be wasted on, if you're struggling with those things, you need to dial those things in first. Temperature, fermentation, temperature control, very important as well. So kind of get those things down, and I think then you're ready to move to all grain.
Yeah, that's what I forgot to mention was you want to achieve clean beer, no off flavors, and even to a sense, you want to be able to have some confidence that you can control the nuances of your fermentation. Your beers don't turn out excessively estery or, with slight off flavors.
Right. Because switching to all grain won't fix those things.
Right.
you're
Right.
going to deal with another set of problems switching to all grain that you have to have those other things dialed in. All grain won't fix, these things. As far as how much harder and expensive it's not too much harder. It's really just another step, and it's a step that pretty much takes care of itself. It's got a few things about it, but it's not that difficult. As far as equipment, if you've read Charlie Papazian's The Joy of Homebrewing, he talks in there about the Zap Pap method, which is 2 buckets
Yep.
with just a drill and drilling a whole bunch of little holes in the bottom, and maybe lining with a bit of mosquito netting or whatever, and that'll do it. There's a lot of instructions on the internet for building mash tuns out of coolers using copper pipe or PVC pipe or things like that. And all those are relatively inexpensive. You don't need a big fancy, brew sculpture or something like that. You just need, the basics. So it's not too much more expensive. And how much space does it take compared to 1 pot and a bucket? I think if you're clever, everything will kind of all nest into the same thing.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be too much more space. It all depends on how you do it. You can also do brew in a bag.
Brew in a bag is the smallest.
Yeah, might be the best way to go. And then really your pot and you really just a mesh bag is all you're adding instead, and that takes up pretty much 0 room. So there you go. Thanks, Johnny, for emailing us, and great question, and good luck on your route. Good luck on your homebrew. All right, let's take another short break. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back. We're enjoying another episode of Brew Strong. We're actually live on Facebook, having some fun here, and we're answering a bunch of questions from folks that are live as well as email. Leaf asks, "Hey Jamil, you mentioned that you have given bad advice. I give a lot of bad advice. Can you be more specific, Leaf?" He says, by using melanoidin malt and lagers. I think it was when you visited Beersmith earlier. What would you use now for a rewrite of the Helles in Brewing Classic styles? So I don't know that it was bad advice. I think that it was
different advice.
Well, all right. So the thing about Brewing Classic styles is, and the thing people miss out on is, these are the recipes that are most likely to win in competition, right? So not necessarily what I feel makes the best version of a given beer, but that
stands out and
it gets first place.
Yep.
Or best of show, right? So that's what this is. So what I did over, the how many years of brewing before I wrote that the recipes for that book was I had a spreadsheet, every entry, every beer, every recipe, and I did an analysis of what recipes won and why. And for a lot of these lagers, it is critical to have enough melanoidin character, kind of popping out on a beer. When somebody has a flight of 10 or 12 beers in front of them, they kind of get numb to, almost like in an IPA, they get numb to the hops as they go through the beers. And if they are not experienced enough to keep a calibration beer at the beginning and keep going back to it to see how everything is stacking up, they lose a sense of what's going on. So they'll lose sense of, the melanoidins or the maltiness in a beer. By beer 10, this lager that you're presenting them, they're numb to that by then. So that was kind of the thinking in doing a lot of those, and it helps when that's the case. I think what I said on Beersmith was I helped popularize certain specialty grains that may not have been used without that. I think it really promoted the use of a lot of certain types of specialty grains, and there are a lot of good specialty grains out there, and you don't necessarily have to use exactly those, which is one of the things I'm disappointed about that book, is that I didn't have enough room to really write the full explanation. Like I did in my BYO articles, right. I explained, here's kind of the range, here's what you're trying to achieve, here are kind of the grains you could use to achieve it. In Brewing Classic Styles, I was limited to one recipe and a small paragraph. And they didn't even want the small paragraph, as I recall. They wanted a bunch of recipes. I'm like, unless we explain what we're doing with this recipe at least a little bit, it's useless to people. So I want to redo it and give a full explanation as to here's what you're trying to achieve, here are some of the tools you can use to achieve that, and here's how you can take this recipe in your own direction. I think that would be a great book.
Yeah,
unfortunately, it's going to be Encyclopedia Britannica. It's going to be so big, but I'd still love to do it. So I guess that answers the question, because this is what I would do. As far as Helles here, at our brewery, we make a Helles we call a lager, because we're convinced that you didn't want to call it Helles because people wouldn't know what it actually was. They wouldn't know it was a lager, but this is what Munich Helles tastes like in Munich, if you ask me. I think is very much so. And we use a German continental Pilsner, and we use tiny bit of Munich, and we use some American two-row, because we're getting too much malt character from the German malts. I mean, it was really just overpowering, so we had to back it down a little bit. So we use a balance of that. And so that's what I would use for the Helles and Brewing Classic Styles today. There you go. All right.
Nice.
Let's see here. Eric asks, any tips on improving hop aromatics in the finished beer? I oftentimes find that hop aroma drops off significantly between the kegging process and the serving a week later.
Purge your kegs. Purge your kegs with CO2. That if that's where you're noticing that drop in hop aroma is from filling the keg to a week later, it's probably oxidation in the headspace.
I'm gonna throw out another little thought here.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. Well, I have two or three things, but one of kind of the oddball thoughts that I had just tasting this beer here is hop bittering drops off very quickly, right? Mm-hmm. In a week, you can lose 25% of your bittering. You might even be losing, within a month, you've lost 50% of your bittering. The interesting thing is, I think that people oftentimes will associate hop aroma with the bittering that they're tasting.
Okay.
And so when the bittering drops off, they have this associative thing where they're saying, oh, the hop aroma is less too. Because the deep ties between,
the overall hop
and flavor.
Character.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the way that, you get aromatics, and even hop bittering, alpha acids, you put those on your, yes, they're bitter, but they're I think we're associating that with hop aroma in a lot of cases. So I think that could possibly be one element of this, and for people to keep in mind. That's why I mention it. The other is, yeah, certain hops will drop off very quickly. And one of the things you can do, especially if you're doing like a single hop thing, if you mix in, 3 or so different hops, and you kind of try and stagger your hop characters, and you'll get a much longer lasting than the individual pieces. You'll get a greater sum of the parts, greater whole as you do that. One of the cool things I found was on Scott Janish's site. He's got a hop oils like kind of database where it's limited data, but it ranks the hops by prominence of given oils and compounds. It's a little odd. It's ranked from like 1 to 37 or something. And so it's not the actual number. It's just a ranking, but you can sort it by those rankings if you're looking for certain compounds. And when you kind of layer in certain compounds, you actually get like a more sustained hop aroma. So sometimes, yes, Citra and Mosaic, but then you put underneath, you put some, Cascade or Columbus or whatever, and the whole becomes much more long-lived, much more prominent. So sometimes it's a blending of hops, I think.
That's a good point.
I'd throw that out there. Let's see here. How about distilled water? Mark asks, he says, yo, so I have brewed a New England IPA 7 times now, all grain brewing. And this has always been hazy and explosively fruity. But my last batch, number 8, is clear, tastes weedy, biscuity, not fruity, floral, or bitter, and then lemongrassy as it warms up. The aftertaste is watery. This happened to my last batch 2, which was a black IPA. 2 factors I can see is that fermentation temperature is slightly high, 71 Fahrenheit, and I'm starting to adjust my water. He says it's looking, when he has it in the fermenter, it is separating like oil and water immediately after knockout in the kettle, which, I mean, that's, you get the hot break that drops, cold break that drops, right? And you should get nice clear wort. That sounds correct to me. He says in the fermenter, it's the same thing. Clear amber color for the top 40% and a very cloudy yellow-green for the bottom 60%. Well, that's all your hop material setting. That's a lot of trub being carried over into the fermenter, which, I mean, generally you want to leave that behind. He goes in to describe his source water. I think you have it there, John. It's but he's asking, why is it watery and not a sticky aftertaste? Did the distilled water hurt the ingredients and the outcome of the fermentation, which is his suspicion? Is there a better way to lower my sulfate than during diluting with distilled? Please don't say RO, as he can't afford that.
Okay, yeah, I looked at this this question deeply this morning. The water profile he sent me, he lives in Massachusetts, Egerton, and they are on a aquifer there, fairly large one, and I looked up the report for that, and I think he made a mistake in either testing his water or reading the report, because he lists 300 ppm sulfate and 300 ppm sodium, when the water report for that aquifer for Egerton lists a sulfate value of 12 ppm. So, and electrochemically, all the anions and cations have to add up to zero. And the report that he sent, the numbers that he sent, don't. I played around with it a little bit on my water adjustment app, and and looking at their report and adding up those numbers, I think that values of sulfate and sodium of 12 and 20 mathematically work and make more sense. So that being said, his water is pretty close to distilled as it is. We're talking 5 ppm calcium, 5 ppm magnesium, only 40 ppm total alkalinity. So it is a very low mineral water, typical for that region. And so I don't think he needs to do any distilled water dilution with that water profile. If he's making New England IPAs, all he needs to do is, add some calcium chloride, maybe a touch more of gypsum to bump up the sulfate a little bit, get like a 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio, maybe 100, 150 chloride to 75 to 100 sulfate, or 50 to 75 sulfate. Lots of room there to play with. He also mentioned, as a result of his numbers, that he was adding, he said 20 milliliters of phosphoric acid to 8.5 gallons of water.
That's a huge amount.
Yeah. So I think he really drove his mash pH and wort pH down,
Right.
and that would result in clarifying the beer. You would get a lot more true separation and settling that way.
Right. Yeah, I think that, I agree. It's a combination of maybe the water isn't the water he thinks, over acidification. It's also possible that, he's moved to this new location, which has kind of thrown him off.
Yeah.
And, maybe he's also, if your mash pH is super low, your extract from that mash pH is going to be super low, right? You're not going to get your extract efficiency. Mash efficiency is, needs to be higher up. He doesn't say he's checking his pH. It's one of the reasons, for God's sakes, check your pHs as much as you can. And so, perhaps he's extracting far less sugar than he thinks he is. I don't know. Maybe he's checking his gravity. Maybe he's not. But, maybe he's getting super low, gravity, or much lower gravity in his kettle, and assuming it's the same because he's done this 7 times before, and so he's actually getting a thinner beer. So that might be a possibility as well.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Good question, Mark. Keep on brewing, brother. Let's do this real quick break, and we'll have more of your questions right after this. All right, we're back. I did want to tell you about my good friends at Brew Chatter. It's a homebrew shop out in Sparks, Nevada. Right. People consider it Reno. It's right there. Good people. It's a beautiful shop with high quality ingredients. You even got a little bar in there you can go into, and often they have Heretic on tap.
There you go.
They are great folks. They know a lot about brewing, and they will help you make some high quality beer. And they have a lot of great events, and they've decided to sponsor their show. So that's the only questionable thing about them, is that they've decided to spend money on being part of Brew Strong. So, whatever. But good folks.
Shows their heart's in the right place.
Yeah, they are lovely people, very funny, very, very kind, very hardworking for the homebrew community. So, give your support to them if you get a chance. You can find them online, brewchatter.com. And like I said, you can find them out near Reno. If you're ever out in lovely Reno, which is an amazing place to visit, stop by the brew shop, have a beer, check out the amazing range of ingredients that they have there for you, and fresh ingredients and equipment, everything else. Good people, check them out, brewchatter.com. All right, let's see here. Jason
Petros?
writes, no, Jason Williams Stockdale writes, if you were planning a farm-based brewery with growing hops, grapes for wine, and a distillery, would you also grow your own barley and malt on site for a majority of your grain bill? Would that be totally insane, a totally insane thing to do, or impossible? Or would it be possible? Would not involve borrowing money with a rush to profit in this model. The best numbers I can come up with now is around 8 million minimum to start. I already own the 320 acres. Well, there's an advantage.
Okay.
I have some infrastructure already. Am I nuts? Everyone around me thinks this could only end in failure. Okay. As somebody else who has gone down the insane road of opening a brewery, that in and of itself is nuts, opening a brewery. The fact that you have 320 acres is quite an advantage. You are nuts. The problem is
you're talking about 3 full-time jobs.
Right. Yeah. Or more. 3
Yeah.
full-time jobs is a brewery. You are 3 full-time jobs plus an ass-kicking contest. It is, I mean, trying to grow hops alone is for a decent-sized brewery. If you're doing like a little 5-barrel or a 3-barrel, I could see growing your own hops.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, you know, just the work involved if you want to grow your own hops for year round, you know, the harvest is a huge amount. And then the drying and preparation and the storage. The same thing of, you know, doing grapes for wine. I mean, people open just wineries. You know, if you have a team of people that is able to do a lot of this work, you know, perhaps, you know, and people know what they're doing. Yeah, I could see pulling that off. And a distillery. And again, a distillery, we added a distillery here, and oh my God, it is so much freaking work. You know, it seems simple, but it's not.
It's a simple test. Is your father-in-law in the position of one of these tasks?
Right. Father-in-law, mother-in-law,
if so,
brothers, sisters, you know, you're going to need a lot of people. With growing your own bar, and I guess, you know, he's probably thinking, I'll just start out with one aspect of it, and I will add these other aspects as I go. That would be, you know, the smart thing to do. With growing your own barley and malting on site for majority of your grain bill. Oh my God. Well, it depends on how big a brewery you're talking about doing. I think even a friend of mine grew his own barley and sent it out for malting. And I mean, just the malting part alone is difficult. And the knowledge of growing the proper barley.
Malting quality barley is not a drop in the bucket.
And it's not, you know, it's not something that's easily grown. I mean, especially if you want the best flavor barley. And you know, the malting process, I mean, that's something people study their lives to learn how to do properly. And there's a big difference between quality and, you know, everything else. You know, it is, there's a lot of crap out there from professionals doing it. So, you know, it's very difficult. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, because one, if you pull this off, it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
2, if you love doing this, well, then you'll never have to work a day in your life. You'll enjoy doing it and you'll just have fun. So why not? And 3, I just love to see if you make a go of it. I would highly stress that what you want to do is, first, you know, start the small brew plant, right?
Yeah.
Use other ingredients, just order them all in, start, whatever your brewery is. You must have a tap room, right? You must, in today's COVID, you must package, get that running to drive revenue, right? Get revenue flowing. And that revenue flowing could, fund some of this other stuff. You might be able to, crowd fund, the planting of the first crop of malt, right? Or grain that could be turned into malt. And you can send it off to have it malted, right? And then bring it back. There's plenty of places that do that. And from that, one of the perks of this is that these, local brewers or home brewers could, get some of that malt. So do things like that to try and make it a community thing, and, put it a step at a time, and then you could use that malt, and you could, kind of gain that knowledge. And once you've got that done, then maybe you could do the hops, or maybe hops are easier to start with, but just take it a stage at a time. And 30, 40 years from now, you may be halfway there. I think it'd be really cool, though. I'd come and check it out. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it all, because you've got a full-time job in raising that barley, another full-time job in getting it malted well. Hops, same thing. And then the wine aspect. So yeah, as you say, start small, 3-barrel, 5-barrel, phase in each program. Certainly the 320 acres, that is enough acreage to grow a decent amount of barley. But there again, I got to emphasize in my talking with maltsters and farmers about raising barley and the economics of raising barley. It is not as easy as growing corn and soybeans, which have been, genetically modified or just bred to be easy to grow. Barley is tricky, and it's very easy to get it overwatered, over fertilized, high protein, less starch. Malting quality barley is the highest grade of barley out there. Everything else is either distiller's grade or animal feed. So, get it, the first step, raising barley, is one hurdle, and then you've got to make sure it's malting quality barley.
There you go. All right. I think we're going to wrap up this episode of Brew Strong. If you're listening live, stay tuned, because we're going to do another hour show answering more of your questions. So don't go anywhere. If you want to ask your questions, you can ask them in the comment section on Facebook, the brewingnetwork.com Facebook page, and we'll get to your questions as they come in. And we've got a bunch more questions from email as well. So hang in there. And if you get a chance, maybe take this moment or two while we're in between shows to go to blickmanengineering.com, check them out, send a nice email to feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Thank John Blickman for paying for this show so you don't have to. And our other fine sponsor, Brew Chatter out of Reno. Good folks there. So until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong, everyone.